Yes.
Awesome. Well, welcome. It's great to have you here.
Thank you for inviting me.
It's always a pleasure. You have been such a pioneer in the field of nutrition and health and well-being, which couldn't be a more important topic to discuss these days, given all the extra added stress that we all find ourselves in our lives right now. So nutrition is a really incredible topic to focus on, because nutrition is actually something that most of us can control in our lives in terms of the inputs that come into our bodies, and the fuel, the high performance fuel we feed the high performance vehicle that is our lives, right?
Absolutely.
So I really appreciate you taking the time out to join us. Everyone, we welcome Laura Lagano. For those who don't know, I'll just give a brief intro of you, Laura, if you don't mind. Laura is a good friend and colleague who I've known for a few years now. And she is a registered dietitian and nutritionist and the author of the CBD Oil Miracle. And she's a co-founder and education director of the Holistic Cannabis Academy. And she has an incredible story in her own life of how she got to this point, which I would love for her to tell it for us to start off. And Laura also is our nutrition board member to the Board of Medicine, which focuses on providing risk-free alternatives to treatments for hard to treat mental and physical illnesses. So Laura, thank you so much again for joining us, and welcome.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Would you mind starting out by telling us a little bit about what got you into the space and the work that has gotten you here today?
Sure, absolutely. So my initial story of how I got into nutrition, and then there's a separate story about how I got into cannabis as a healing plant. But nutrition, and I don't think I've told you this story. This started in my mother's kitchen in Brooklyn, and there was always a talk radio station on. I believe, maybe it was QXR. I don't remember, but it was always talk radio. And I'm not sure, when you have talk radio on, you're not always listening, but you catch snippets of things. Well, this talk radio happened to pretty frequently have on it nutrition luminaries like Adele Davis and like Ben Feingold. Ben Feingold was, I believe he was a pediatrician, and he was all about taking out, he believed that artificial colors and things derived from petroleum, plus certain type of sugars and some other food compounds, actually contributed to ADHD. And at that time, it's not like now. Now we have a lot of ADHD, we have food allergies, we have childhood cancers, and all of this is definitely related to the food supply and environmental toxins. But at that time, he was really poo-pooed. People mocked him. Well, fast forward many, many years later, unfortunately, after his death, there was a study done. It was published in the New England Journal of Medicine confirming that. Soon after that, a lot of companies, like cereal companies who made super sugary cereals, took out the food coloring. Well, that was a great first start, but it was still sugary cereal. And what he was talking about was exactly the topic we're talking about today, which is the relationship between food and mood. This has been and has continued to be my passion in life, looking at the relationship between food, and then it became bigger to lifestyle and mood. How do these choices impact us? And at the time, there was one route to go to really learn about nutrition, and that was to pursue a degree as a dietitian, which then led me, an undergraduate degree, a graduate degree, some doctoral work that I never finished. I only have 3 credits left. That I know that's bad, and But that got me to that point. But not surprisingly, and I'm sure you had the same experience in school, nobody really talked about this. So here I was thinking I was going to learn about food and mood. I remember doing a rather extensive paper in graduate school. And this is at Columbia University, which, is considered pretty progressive. But my professors didn't think there was any association. And I'm sure they've changed their tune since then, but I never let it go. I always stayed true to that. And in fact, fast forward many years, I had at the time 3 children. My daughter Isabella, and I know that's the story you want me to tell, was young. She was getting OT, which is occupational therapy. And I was probably trolling the internet looking for things for her. I wasn't shopping or anything like that. And what did I come across but that the Feingold Association, because there isn't exists, was putting on a conference just a few miles from my home with an occupational therapy association. So I thought, oh, I have to go to this. And sure enough, they talked about food and mood and hyperactivity. So it was such, things were coming together. Although you're talking that this is like my first exposure to listening to Ben Feingold, I was probably 12. And now you're talking about me as a mother in my 30s. Right. So, there were many years getting to that point. But I think it was, I think if you have a passion about something and a belief, especially if it's in the area of health and medicine, people do eventually come around. And if you're lucky, they come around in your lifetime. But I think you and I both know that, no matter how progressive you think your training is in the most progressive school that you go to, it can be a bit myopic.
For sure.
And it's people like to play it safe, and and that's the way it is. But when you have a child, and this is, continuing the story, my daughter, Isabella, had grand mal seizures and a number of other characteristics that together you would give her a diagnosis of autism. And so I spent basically the first, after the first seizure, which was 10 minutes long, which, as you know, for a grand mal seizure, wow, that's pretty long.
Scary,
but
too.
The second seizure was 50 minutes long.
Wow.
So that was pretty bad. And now at this point, I had already been to see a neurologist, and the neurologist was not really giving me much. Of course, he gave her medication, and the medication either made her a zombie or made her nuts. And then, of course, what happens, then there's another medication. So by the time she was 4, she was on 3 different meds, all of them meds used in adults, and all of them, there were no studies to see what these meds would do to a 4-year-old and in combination. And so when he told me that he said she wasn't going to speak, I looked at him, and this was when she was younger, not when she was 4. And I said, of course she's going to speak. We're Italian. And that just seems so ridiculous to me. What do you mean she's not going to speak? I'm not going to take that. That's unacceptable to me. So I ended up then just taking matters into my own hands. At the time, though I was trained with a master's degree from a fancy college, I wasn't really working in a clinical capacity. I was always working as a writer and as a consultant. So I was an educator who was more of educating the masses. I wasn't working really as a clinician with deep dive health issues.
Right.
And at one point, my husband said to me, like, I started thinking about fish oil in the way, like, I didn't forget things. I started thinking about biochemistry. I started thinking about how fish oil worked and how other supplements and compounds in food worked. And that then I was off and running. And she did go on. I did not use cannabis to quell her seizures. I actually used food. And she was on, you know, a modified ketogenic diet, not in a clinical capacity in a facility, but it was enough to quell her seizures.
That's incredible. And that's not the first time I've heard that.
No, it is at this point, it is a well-known modality, but most of the children or patients who go in, they go into a clinic setting, right, and are very well monitored. But Isabella did not require that. And I don't even know how many modalities that I've tried with her since that time, but many, many, some with astonishing results, like literally immediately, and others, the result was draining my bank account. But, you know, you never know. Right. And, you know, I think as anybody who's out there listening who's a parent, you know that you're going to do whatever you can do within your resourcefulness to help your child.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really appreciate you sharing that with us. You have such an incredible story and an incredible journey. And especially, you know, to hear how much of an impact nutritional modifications made in not just your daughter's life, but the quality of life of your whole family, right?
Yeah. Well, and all my patients, everybody. Yeah.
Right. And just with respect to your daughter's, Isabella's situation, what percentage, just to give people an idea, what percentage of her improvement that you've witnessed would you say is nutrition responsible for?
Oh,
it's a hard question, least, but
I know. I don't even know how to quantify that.
Even if you just had like to guess.
At least 50%. But right, here's also the way it worked. Everything else that I did with her, and this is where I'm all about the integration of modalities. I don't think that there's ever just one thing that works for anything in life.
Right.
So
usually the things that work well together.
Correct. So her speech her speech therapist, that mode of therapy worked better because of what she was eating, what her food plan was. The same with occupational therapy. So everything worked better, you know, because of that. And, you know, she also has hyperphagia. And, you know, hyper meaning, I don't know who all your listeners are, but hyperphagia is basically an inability to stop eating. It's, right, you know, and it's very based in the endocannabinoid system. It's one of the hallmarks of chromosome 15 disorders. And she has something called interstitial duplication of chromosome 15. So she doesn't have the full duplication. She has a micro duplication. And, you know, so monitoring the hyperphagia, that is no easy task. So there, you know, there are a number of things. So her progress and all the modalities that I use with her continue to this day. I mean, now she has aged out of the educational system where she had entitlements, and now she's in the post 21. You know, I hesitate to call it system of care, and it's different in every state, where you have to be eligible, you know, for funding and program. And, you know, that's a whole other thing that you have to figure out and make things work. Because who stops learning at 21? Nobody.
No one. Right. Right.
No one.
No one who wants to grow, that is. And I think there's two things you mentioned that I really want to touch on that I think are critically important that we'll come back to here. One of them is the endocannabinoid system. And for those who don't know, everyone's heard of cannabis or marijuana, but the endocannabinoid system is the receptor system that has evolved to be in most living things, particularly mammals and also many plants, that involves what we call the endogenous endocannabinoid, meaning the cannabinoids that our body makes naturally. So there are molecules that our body makes that are naturally bind to receptors called CB1 and CB2, which you don't need to remember. But the point is that we've evolved receptors to receive cannabinoid molecules that can actually naturally modulate inflammation and reduce inflammation, can improve balance of the autonomic nervous system, improve calm in the body and focus and emotional health at large. And one thing, and Laura's book about the CBD oil miracle goes over this in incredible detail and with a lot of very good practical tips about how to understand and use these products nutritionally, and how, similar to what you're talking about with your daughter, optimizing the nutrition, the optimizing the functioning of the system prior to the other therapy techniques that she's doing makes the system more responsive to the therapy, right? And that is so important. And we don't think about that much. We're always looking, many of us don't realize that we're looking for a quick fix, but there's no such thing as a quick fix in most situations. We really need to get to the root of optimizing the functioning of our system, putting in the best fuel possible so that our system has the best chances of adapting to stress and bouncing back as best we can, and reaching our fullest potential, whatever that may be. And to give you an idea of how critical the nutritional changes that you made with your daughter are for controlling seizures, I am good friends and colleagues with a former director of NASA who actually developed early onset seizures as a child due to a traumatic head injury. And he could not control his seizures as a kid and was prescribed phenobarbital, which is a terribly side effect prone medication that is very damaging to children's development. And he hated it because it slowed him down. And he was a really fast, smart guy. And so what did he do? Unbeknownst to him, he joined the wrestling team in school and started doing a wrestler's diet, right? And what do wrestlers do?
Yeah.
It's basically
high protein,
high fat ketogenic diet that focuses on building muscle and trimming as much fat as possible. And it turned out that when he self-tapered his own, and I don't recommend anybody self-taper the medicine, please work with your doctor, but at that time, 50 years ago, I would say, when he was doing this, he didn't know any better. And so he just hated the medicine he was on. He tapered it off himself, and on the wrestler's diet managed to sufficiently sustain remission from his seizure disorder for years and years. And to this day, he is still one of the very first people who was using the keto diet to treat seizure disorder for the longest period of time, which is really interesting. And so this is something that is actually being studied now as a novel therapeutic for seizure disorders, which is very exciting. And there's lots of other opportunities here too. So before we go, without going down that rabbit hole any further, the world that we're in today is an incredibly stressful world. We're surrounded by many more things than usual that seem to be threatening to us, out of our control, confusing, overwhelming. Can you talk a little bit about how stress impacts nutrition and how nutrition impacts how we cope with stress?
Well, I think one of the primary things that happens with stress, and I think all of us, this is familiar to everybody, and certainly during this time, during the pandemic, the stress eating is out of hand, and nobody is really stress eating, vegetables. Most people are stress eating, cookies and chips. They're stress eating, carbohydrates, because they do have a calming effect. There's a reason why we stress eat those foods. Of course, the problem is, a whole sleeve of cookies is very different from 2. So the problem is the overconsumption of these, processed foods during these stressful times. And what else is happening? We're not getting a lot of movement. So I'm going to even just forget about using the term exercise. It's not a term that I actually like, because I think that for many people, it's very off-putting, because they imagine either joining a gym, which they don't want to do, or being on a competitive team. But we need movement. Most of the time, it wasn't that long ago when you didn't have to go to a gym, because your entire day was full of movement that kept you well, that kept you healthy. So now during COVID, we have a lot less movement, whether it's because people aren't going to the gym or they can't participate in sports teams, but also because nobody's going anywhere. You know, you're confined, you're on lockdown in your house. And here's the interesting thing about movement. And I think all of us can do this. The best thing to do for your body is actually not to sit all day in front of your computer or at your desk or whatever sedentary job you may have, and then go to the gym and work out like a lunatic. The best thing is actually to get up from your desk every hour. It doesn't have to be for a long time. It could just be for a couple of minutes. You can take a little walk. You know, if you live in an urban area like me, you could take a little walk around the block. You take a little walk to the store, a little hike. You can do some stretching activity. You can do some yoga poses. Just get up and do something where your body is not in the same position. And believe me, you'll do yourself a lot of good. But what the question you had asked, Dr. Dave, about, you know, what is stress due to nutrition? Well, it depletes a lot of our vitamins and minerals. So it's so important during any times of stress. You really, really have to nourish your body. You know, if we think of things as simply as when you were talking before about how it's important to have the nutrition before you start on the next thing. Nutrition, food, is the basis of cellular biology. This is the basis. It is the most important thing, but somehow is something that typically doctors don't talk about. It's not something that's glossed over, and the most that might get discussed is lose weight, stop eating that. It's not really very helpful because people need help in changing behaviors, because the behaviors are the basis of all of this for people. So I think that's really the key is getting that help for changing those behaviors. And I'm going to say that besides, if getting up from your desk is proving, to be too difficult, just try it once every 2 hours, not once every hour in the beginning. You start with these little things and then you build. But probably the most important thing at this time is to try to reduce any what I call toxic load. And we get that.
We talk about that a whole lot. That's like one of the most important places to start.
Absolutely. And it's like when you were talking, I was thinking, I love analogies. Before you're going to paint a wall, the paint only looks good if the prep is good, right? And the prep takes so long and it's so laborious. But
yeah, you gotta scrape all the old paint off and even out the wall and maybe even sand it a little bit.
The spackling, the sanding, the taping,
and priming it.
I live in a very old house, and everything takes a long time to do. And I think, you have to prep your body. I was just reading an article today about, it was about weight loss. And there are a lot of people, particularly of a certain age, especially women, have challenges losing weight. The whole idea of calories in and calories out, that's really a fallacy. There's a lot more to weight loss than that. And one of the reasons why they have such difficulty losing weight is because toxins are stored in the adipose tissue or the fat. And if you don't get rid of those, the fat's not going to go because the toxins want to stay, just to put it in the most simplistic way.
And the toxins create inflammation, which then triggers our body to feel like it's in a stress response biologically that feels like it needs to hang on to calories just in case we're in a situation of survival.
So even when people are following all the rules and doing the food plan that they're supposed to be doing, nothing's working. They're getting very discouraged. They're exhausted. And the exhaustion and a lot of the fatigue they're feeling is not because they're not consuming enough calories. It's because now the toxins are starting to move from phase 1 to phase 2, but they can't get to phase 3. They can't leave the body. So now you've made the toxins labile in your bloodstream. So that actually creates a more serious situation, and that has to be supported. There are a number of different supplements that can support that, but one of the things that people need to do, and this is, this is not in any order of importance, but one is to drink half your weight in ounces of water. So just take your weight in pounds, divide it by 2, and that's how many ounces of water you should drink. Now, what I don't want you to do is assume
Can you say that one more time?
Drink half your weight in ounces of water.
Okay.
Okay. So
half your weight in pounds.
Right. So if you weigh 120 pounds, then you have 60 ounces of water a day. So something like this. So what I suggest people do, there you go. Dr. Dave has his water bottle. You have to measure out your water in the beginning of the day, whether it's in glasses, whether it's in water bottles, whether it's in a pitcher, because let me tell you, by 4 o'clock, you're not going to remember how much water you drank. You're going to think you already drank your water. So I know, for instance, that this is 20 ounces. So I know how many of these I need to have to reach my, goal. That's also very important for bowel movements. You are not going to be
so important.
You have to have at least 1 bowel movement a day. Technically, you really should have a bowel movement after each meal. But that, for most people, women almost never, there's very few women I've ever met who have a bowel movement after every meal. There are men who can achieve that. And I'm like, go, that's awesome. No pun intended. But, water and movement, more than fiber, is actually what helps that to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So you really, and if you're really getting stuck, my number one go-to is magnesium. Mm-hmm. A magnesium glycinate supplement to take at night. So, and that just works wonders. Now, obviously, you still want to be eating, a food plan that's rich in fruits and vegetables and other fibers. But that doesn't work without the water and the movement typically. Right. But the simple things to do to lower toxic load are what I was talking about earlier, like the Feingold diet, to avoid all of those toxins, the artificial colors and dyes, and, choosing organic as much as possible. And there is sort of a pecking order of organic. So if you think about animal products, right, like us, they have fat. So what do you think is happening? They have toxins stored in the fat. Mm-hmm. So now it's really vital to try to, as much as you can without breaking the bank, choosing animal products that are organic. And right. A lot of these are easy to find now.
Right. If you're going to eat meat, if you're going to make the choice to eat meat, which we will not discourage you to do, because eating meat can be very healthy for a lot of people nutritionally, it is definitely a good priority to try to eat organic and sustainably raised meat as much as possible.
And grass-fed.
And grass-fed, because that meat is, as you said, that the fat is concentrated, all the toxins are concentrated into the fat for all of us living
absolutely
animals.
But that can be a little bit more difficult to find. Eggs, dairy products, these are easy to find. Right. Organic and farm raised. And then you want to look at anything that's ground, so herbs and spices, coffees, teas, all easy to find organic. Now it's easy to find everything, no matter where you live. Not that I'm a big proponent of buying things online. That's not my thing. I grew up in a household with immigrant grandparents living upstairs, and the bread, maybe at one time bread was even delivered, but there was the bread store. The eggs were definitely delivered. Seltzer was delivered. Milk was delivered. There was a separate butcher. Yeah. So the day was about preparing the meals. The day was about, and I think that's just great when people can do that. It's just a very different lifestyle than we have. And then you have to start thinking about other things, like what you cook your food in and what you store it in.
Right.
Of course, so needless important. To say,
the kind of oil.
Right. I'm not a Teflon proponent at all. I would say completely stay away from that. Try to store your food in glass. You know, all the things that I think we've been hearing about, and a really easy resource to find some of these things and learn about them is ewg.org, the Environmental Working Group. They also give
That's a great
list.
resource. Thank you.
It's a fantastic resource. They actually give a list that they put out every year of fruits and vegetables that have the most pesticide and the least. So it's the dirty dozen and the clean 15. So some of the things, you know, remain, never change on that list. So, you know, you'll always see strawberries on the dirty dozen. You'll always see apples. I believe you'll always see celery. So potatoes. So, you know, somebody once told me that potato farmers who are growing conventional potatoes, they grow those and sell those. And then the potatoes they have for their family are separate and grown organically.
I have heard that too.
Yeah. You know, strawberries are considered like one of the dirtiest.
They are, yeah.
Fruits. And
I think all berries, right? The soft berries, particularly.
I'm not sure. I don't know about blueberries, but definitely strawberries and apples. You know, these are the things that people eat all the time. So when you think about something that has a harder skin, like an avocado or a banana or mango,
orange.
Right? It doesn't have, you know, the same type of issues.
Right.
So, you know, lowering that toxic load in any way. Some of these ways are simple, like cleaning products. People don't think about that. To me, that's the easiest thing people can do. Most people are not like so attached to their brand of cleaning product that they can change it to one that's non-toxic. And personal products, that's a pretty serious one, especially when we talk about, you know, young people. And when I say young people, I mean like teenagers who love products and they love to use multiple products, and they're basically getting multiple toxins. And these toxins are endocrine disruptors.
Right.
It's the worst possible thing you can do to your body. Well, an endocrine disruptor is really going to get in the way of so many processes in your body, but what it can contribute to is obesity, gynecomastia, better known as man boobs for men. And that's an easy way to get young boys not to spray all that stuff and in their hair. And you know, and then later on, you know, developing diabetes. And then, you know, all of this gets passed along. This is in your epigenetics. This then is part of your genetic code that you're passing on to your children. So this is why we're seeing more, part of the reason why we're seeing more childhood obesity.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And especially the use, I think you did mention briefly, but to reemphasize that something that's in almost all the processed food that we have access to, particularly in the US, which is outlawed in many countries in Europe, is high fructose corn syrup and artificial sweeteners, which are so deleterious to our ability to regulate our metabolism. And you could do everything right to get your weight where you want it, your muscle mass where you want it, your mental abilities where you want it. And if you're still taking in artificial sweeteners like high fructose corn syrup, you might not notice any change, because that single thing can offset the whole metabolic system by just literally, as Laura was saying, junking it up with toxic load. So there's a reason why these sweeteners are illegal in other countries. They are more concerned about public health than the bottom line dollar line, right? And there's a really important question that Gregory Wong asked that I want to ask you next, because it actually is in line with what I was going to ask you next anyway, which is, you mentioned that you could stress eat vegetables instead, or stress eat healthy food instead of stress eating, artificially sweet food, or food that's very high in added sugar in general, even if it's natural sugar or things of that nature. What is a good way for people to start to retrain their routine? You know, first off, the importance of routine, and could you talk a little bit about the importance of routine and structure, and how people can start to retrain their, and practice retraining their reward system to change their behavior?
So routine, you know, what I love to say to people is that if you've been around a baby, you were a baby yourself. We know what babies are like, and what do we know about babies? Babies have to have routines, right? It's just the way it is. If the baby does not have a routine, everybody around the baby is suffering. And we're all babies. We're just big babies. And I think people see now during the pandemic when we have to make our own routine. So if you're, you know, one of the lucky people who still has a job, well, now what's happening, you're working at home. Well, it's great. It can be great for some people. You work, there's no commute. So that's taken out the stress. But now, how do you create that routine? You know, you're wearing pajama pants you know, during the day when you're on your Zoom call. You know, you don't have to do all the quaffing that you would normally do. So the part of that routine is gone. So it's really important to stay in some semblance of a routine and make it very achievable. And I would say to write it down. I always think you know, you own it more if you write it down. And when I say write, I mean write with a pen. The way, and
Pull
Dr.
it
Dave,
out of your head.
Yeah, you can talk to this more than I can, but when you write with a pen, the way your brain works, it's going right from your brain through your arm to the pen to the paper. There's a different memory mechanism than for typing. So, you know, write down what your routine is going to be and make it simple. Then if you want to add something, add one thing at a time. Don't try to, you know, when people like this is why I'm not a big New Year's resolution planning person, because it's too much stuff. And, you know, especially this year, you know, be kind to yourself, add one thing. And when you add that one thing, add it to something you're already doing. So I would venture to say that I would say all adults are brushing their teeth at some point after they get up in the morning, right? So if you're going to add something new, so let's say one of the things you're going to add is oil pulling. Oil pulling is a great way to remove toxins from your mouth. And this is something you have to start a little bit at a time. You know, you would take a little bit of coconut oil. You really need to have it in there for about 20 minutes, but when you're doing this in the beginning, 20 minutes is going to be way too long. But when you do it, you're putting the coconut oil in your mouth and you're swishing it around. You have to be doing something else. You know, you're not just sitting around with coconut oil in your mouth. You know, maybe you're washing dishes, right, or you're ironing, or you're getting your mail. You know, you're doing something. Obviously, you can't speak, but you're doing something else.
Right.
So
that's such a good idea.
So that's a great time to do that. That could be a great time to take a supplement. Like for probiotic, I always recommend that people take a probiotic when they're eating a meal. Not everybody eats breakfast when they get up. And I think the whole notion that you have to have breakfast immediately when you get up, that's really not the case. Many people are not hungry when they wake up in the morning. Now, I'm not saying to avoid eating. You know, I'd say you should have, if you're getting up at a typical wake time, you know, 6, 7 o'clock, you probably should eat something by 11. You don't need to eat at 8 o'clock in the morning now. And that actually brings me to another tip. And this is if we go back to, you know, maintenance of a good, healthy weight, or just, you know, keeping your appetite in control, is to eat. You can eat in an eating window. So this is part of, you know, fasting, which I don't know, we don't have time to go into that, I don't think, but if you can eat in an eating window where you're eating for 8 hours of the day, and then you're not eating for the remainder of those hours. Now, so let's assume another remainder of those hours is 8 hours that you're sleeping. So that means you have another 8 hours that, right, that you're awake, that you're not eating. So your eating window could be, you know, from 11 until like 7, right. 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. And that's just the time that you're eating in. And then the rest of the time you're not eating. So that's something that many people can achieve, because, you know, I don't think it's a surprise for anyone to hear that eating, you know, right before you go to sleep is not such a good idea.
Right.
Though I can tell you one thing we do know is that if you were to have a little bit of a carb, if you suffer from insomnia and you have a little bit of a carb before you're going to go to bed, that is going to help. Now, but I'm not saying a sugary carb. This is not
a complex carb.
Right. It's not
and not stuffing yourself, just having like a little bit.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, but that's the challenge that we have in this country.
Moderation.
It's all about too much. So even when I talk about cannabis, people are imagining, you know, the one person they know who overconsumes cannabis.
Snoop Dogg.
Right. No, somebody they know personally.
Okay. Yeah. Right.
If you do know Snoop Dogg for real, then I would like to meet him, because I want to talk to him about microdosing. So you know, the guy, it's usually a guy who's in his mother's basement and he's way past the time where he should be living at home and he's playing video games. But, you know, we're talking about microdosing, and it's the same thing with food. You know, one of the things that really struck me whenever I go to visit my cousins in Italy, and they live in a tiny town called Laurito in the Celentano mountain range. It's in Campania. It's exactly what you would imagine, just absolutely beautiful. So I'm going to tell you, in the morning, these are the choices: coffee and cigarettes, which is fascinating to me. Nobody in this town has lung cancer. So they clearly have a protective gene, or they're eating a protective diet. Don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting coffee and cigarettes for breakfast for Americans. But what they have for breakfast, when they do have it, which is later in the day, they have a cornetto, which is actually sweet. So that's sort of interesting that they have it, but that's like the only time they have a sweet, in the morning. And there's no snacking. There's no drinking caloric beverages. A pasta portion is very, very small. Everything is organic just because it is, and it's called biologic there.
And usually local, right?
Local. Everybody has a garden. Now, they might not tend to their garden. Some people do, but somebody else does. And then there's, you know, you're sharing a cow or a pig, you know, with other people in the community. And you couldn't possibly drive, because there's really no roads in this little medieval town, and there's nowhere to really go in the town. So there's walking constantly, but they have something that's very important that unfortunately we're missing right now during COVID, and that's socialization and community. It's continual community. And that's what you will find is, I think, the number one thing that keeps people healthy. I think we have, and this is before the pandemic, but I think we have a pandemic of loneliness in the United States. And we really need to find, you know, people are not joining the Rotary and the Elks Club and all these community centers. They're no longer joining like they used to, where the church or the synagogue or the mosque is a center of life, you know. Or I remember in my own life, when my kids were in school, I did so much with the school. You know, I don't think they called it the PTA anymore, but, you know, all the fundraising and all the committees. Well, I don't do that anymore because my children are older now. So we have to find these ways. And, you know, social media is not the way to do that. We have to meet in person. And right now, Zoom is taking, you know, over that. And it unfortunately, it's the only substitute at this time, and whatever other platforms there are.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think that that community is so important, because the community makes us feel safe, right? And when we're disconnected from the community, similar to what's happened in the US recently, people forget how similar we are to our neighbors, to our friends, and we lose touch, and people start to become, the people who we spend all this time with or near, start to become unfamiliar, and actually can trigger our stress response rather than console it or help us to feel safe. And that interconnectedness of the community couldn't be more important, whether it's through religious community, your local neighborhood communities, you know, whatever it might be, but just having that sense of community to help us feel connected to something bigger than ourselves, right?
Absolutely.
And that really is incredible for just reducing inflammation in our bodies by helping us remember that we're not alone, right? We're all in this together. We all are here for each other. And, you know, what could be more important? And I think on that note, Christian Edwards asked a really interesting question, which goes back to something you mentioned earlier, Laura, that I can answer real quick, which is that if one changes their habits, can we turn back the hands of time and stop bad genetics or epigenetics from passing on to our children? And I think that the ultimate answer to that is we can't really change our genetics, what's in the DNA, but we can change how that DNA is expressed, which is called epigenetics, which is what's on the DNA and tells our DNA what to turn up and what to turn down. And we actually talk about this in very specific detail with Dr. Joe Maroon on a previous webinar, which I won't get into in detail today, but the answer is yes. By making consistent, positive, constructive behavior changes for ourselves, we not only can change our own biological environment in our bodies, we actually can make such significant changes over time that we can change what gets passed on to our offspring. We can end the cycles of trauma and inflammation that may have existed for generations before us, which is incredibly fascinating. And for anybody who's interested in that work, I highly recommend checking out Dr. Rachel Yehuda, who is one of the leaders in this space, with a specific focus on PTSD, who's also in New York at Mount Sinai in the Bronx, VA. So that is a particularly interesting area for us. And there is, you know, there's so much that we could talk about in this area. I think, you know, I know that we have a lot to talk about, and you know, I wanted to make sure we're respectful of your time, Laura. Do you have a hard stop at in 10 minutes or?
No, I can go a little bit longer. Okay. Although my daughter might come into the room.
That's okay. What do you say about it going a quarter past the hour?
Okay, sure.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Because I think that a lot of people are interested in fasting. And we didn't originally plan to talk about this, but this is becoming a really big topic. Dave Asprey just came out with a book that's very popular called Fast This Way. There's lots of people who focus and have talked about intermittent fasting, many fasting for days to clear out and cleanse the body. Fasting obviously isn't for everyone. Young women and women of childbearing age, oftentimes not as good to fast because it can disrupt the hormone balance and menstrual cycles. But I thought it'd be great for people to hear it from you. What's your take on fasting, and what do you think is what do you think are the key takeaways for people to understand why fasting can be beneficial?
Well, there are different types of fasting. So there's the fasting that I already mentioned, which is the eating window. So that's actually considered fasting. Right. You know, you want it to be at least 13 hours of not eating. More than that is actually better. So the example I gave was 16 hours of not eating. So that's probably the simplest way to fast. Another way that some people fast is they have one day where they only drink water. That is more difficult, I think, than the eating window. So you see what happened? The doorbell rang, and I am going to have to see who it is. I am very sorry.
No worries at all. This is a good time to answer some questions. Do you, let's see here. Jonathan Muller asked, does using an infrared sauna help to push out toxins? I think the traditional use of saunas, especially the Nordic saunas, is thought to be effective. And there are some studies that have come out about extracting toxins through the sweating process, and whether that's in a sweat lodge or a sauna, that can definitely be an effective way. And Laura's back, so I'll let you take over again.
And Isabella has a sauna, of course. We have an individual one for her. So, you know, we have it, you know, for those of us who can't afford to build a sauna, or you don't have room for it if you live in an urban environment. So she has an individual sauna, and she has actually brought it with her when she's gone to camp in the summer, and she loves it. She asks to do these things. You know, she just told me last week she wanted to go, she thought she had to go back to the acupuncturist. So this is, you know, somebody who's listening to her body. So yes, sauna is a great thing to include, you know, for the detoxing. Now, the other ways of fasting are, now there's intermittent fasting, where you're actually taking in over a 5-day period, a very reduced caloric intake with specific types of, you know, foods and, you know, a specific nutrition protocol. And it does reset the apostat. And there, you know, if people are interested in that, I guess, I mean, I can put my email in the chat, and people can contact me about that if they'd like. It's a program that you would do like for 3 consecutive months, for 5 days, for 3 consecutive months. So 5 days in each month. And what you'll see, you know, a lot of people want to do that for weight loss. And I think the more weight, and when I say weight, I mean fat, because you really don't want to lose muscle. This is where we get into trouble with a lot of diets, because then people start losing muscle, and that's not what you want. You want to be losing fat. And this type of program does that. But the real reason to do it is really more for a detoxification and a metabolic reset. So that can be very helpful. Now, whether or not you want to try that now during the pandemic, you know, it really depends on where your head is at. You know, I never want any food recommendations or lifestyle change recommendations to stress people out. That's like the opposite of what I want, right?
Right.
And people do get stressed out. You know what? I don't know. You could talk way more about this than I can, because I think it's a psychological phenomenon. And this is to do everything in life, whether you're talking about going gluten-free or you're talking about going to visit your mother-in-law. The thinking about it is most of the time worse than the actual doing of it. So the thought process, how we replay these things, these stories in our heads, and then when you do it, it's not so bad. So I don't know but that is what happens. And I think that's going on a lot now during the pandemic, because people have a lot more time to ruminate.
Yep.
You know, and you know, unless you're Fran Lebowitz or some kind of a humorist or Mark Twain like person who's making money, you know, ruminating, it's generally not a good thing to do.
I did have one question for you from a participant that I think is a quick one. Do you work with patients with autoimmune conditions such as rheumatoid arthritis?
Yes.
Or autoimmune conditions?
Yes.
Because nutrition is so important in autoimmunity. And we have found that over the years in a number of different conditions. So, so there's your answer, Lisa. Going on the same train that we were just on, can you talk about the microbiome a little bit and gut health? And, you know, what does this mean? And, you know, what is the microbiome and why is it so important to understand?
So the microbiome is now pushed the skin aside as the largest organ in the body. So the microbiome is not only in our gastrointestinal tract, it's also in our nose, in our mouth, in our, genital area. So you know, even on your skin, you have a microbiome, and it's actually protecting you. So there, I believe, I don't remember what the number is, but we have more microbiotic cells than we do human cells in our body. So the question is like, who's hosting who. So one of the things I like to point out about the microbiome, and I remember this when I was in graduate school, the professor gave the wrong answer because I think she didn't know the answer. People sometimes wake up in the morning being ravenous, being very hungry. Mm-hmm. When that happens, that usually means that you have eaten something at night, typically late at night, that is a sugar or is converted into a sugar. So whether you had a half a bottle of white wine, or whether you had, you know, a whole sleeve of Oreos, or you ate a meal that...
Alcohol is a major culprit too, because alcohol impairs our body's ability to make new sugars at night, which keeps us even and from not going hypoglycemic when we're sleeping. So if you drink a lot, right.
Yeah, it also makes you incredibly yeasty.
Right.
And, you know, too much yeast I'm not saying you do have to have a little bit of yeast, just like you have to have a little bit of inflammation, but too much is a big, big problem. And we see this a lot. And then how do we see this playing out clinically? You see people with, you know, a athlete's foot or some sort of a rash on the foot, or these and often it comes out as a dermatitis. So what is going on in your gastrointestinal system with your microbiome can be reflected on your skin. So think about that. So we have this, I mean, what I always like to talk about, and I know this is a big area of yours too, Dr. Dave, is this bidirectional communication between the gut, right, where the microbiome and our gastrointestinal system, and the brain. So this is a bidirectional communication. So this is why we call the gut the second brain. 85% of our neurotransmitters are produced in the gut. Well, I think everybody knows that neurotransmitters are important. You want your brain to function properly. Well, if you're not feeding your microbiome those more, you know, health forward foods, you're not going to have a microbiome that is going to serve your brain well. And what's interesting is that the endocannabinoid system is what's driving the bus for this. So I think what we're going to, it's unbelievably fascinating, because I didn't even realize in all my years of being, you know, a dietitian, I was impacting the endocannabinoid system and the microbiome before I even ever heard about those things. Because right. you are, when you're changing what you eat, and when you're changing some behaviors, when you're adding meditation, when you're adding tapping, when you're adding the Apollo, when you're adding, and when meditation, I want to point out, I think a lot of people imagine that meditation, you have to sit on a special pillow. Okay,
Not
you know what? Meditation is something, it's whatever works for you. And if you think about a lot of religions have beads, right? There's mala beads, there's the rosary. That's a meditative activity. If you talk to anybody who knits and crochets, that is meditate. If you know what you're doing, that's a meditative activity. Gardening, talk to a lot of people who garden. Cooking, if it's not something that people see as a drudgery, there are many things that are meditative. You don't have to be sitting still to be meditating. Tapping is something I like.
Yep, that's a great one.
And it's free.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, I think it's really important that, again, part of the reason, and I should have said this in the beginning, but part of the reason why we're bringing this webinar to you is because this information is so valuable, obviously, and it's stuff that we don't even learn in medical school. We do not learn as doctors, which is so crazy, how to understand this information better and how to deliver it to our patients. It's basically omitted from the medical school curriculum and from our training. I know as a doctor, everyone in my generation, pretty much as a physician, unless you go to osteopathic school, we get like 2 or 3 days of nutrition in our entire medical training, which is not even close to enough to be able to understand all of the stuff we're talking about. And to give you an idea of how important these systems are that we're talking about, the gut connection to the brain is called the enteric nervous system, or the gut nervous system. It is actually the source of more serotonin in our brains, which is one of the most important neurotransmitters for feeling good, than any other source in our own bodies, including our brain itself. There are more serotonin connections between the gut and the brain, again, than any other part of our bodies. And that's actually how we discovered the serotonin system in the first place, was through the gut-brain axis in the 40s, I believe. And what's even more interesting is that when the endocannabinoid system that you were talking about earlier, the endocannabinoid system is the receptors for that system, the CB1 and CB2 receptors, particularly CB1, is the most common receptor of its kind throughout all living things, especially mammals. That is wild, because when you think about how conserved this is over time, this has evolved for a reason. This doesn't just appear in humans, right? This has evolved for a reason to protect us and to conserve our health on a preventative and long-term basis, emotionally, mentally, and physically, which actually starts, as you said, in the gut microbiome. And by optimizing what we eat and what the good bacteria and fungus in our body wants, like the yeast, we can actually optimize the amount of yeast and the amount of good bacteria. We then suppress the growth of the bacteria that aren't helping us, and the overgrowth of yeast and fungi that aren't helping us. And then that translates into more balanced serotonin in our brains, more resilience to stress, less likelihood of depression, anxiety, PTSD, and succumbing to mental illness and metabolic disorder, and all these other things kind of all come in combination with that. So this system and knowing that it exists, it could not be more important for our health overall.
And I think this is how you can understand that, or begin to try to understand the endocannabinoid system as a function of balance and homeostasis, and how everybody has, in Dr. Ethan Russo's words, a different endocannabinoid tone. So for those people who are more predisposed to anxiety and depression, there's a dysregulation in the endocannabinoid system. And what I find fascinating, and this was something I discovered in my own family, you know, for gynecological health and women's health overall, the endocannabinoid system is really, really significant. And you'll see in families, and this is something in my own family, where there's, you know, one woman who had recurrent miscarriage, one with polycystic ovarian syndrome, one with endometriosis. So, and this is all an imbalance in the endocannabinoid system, which interestingly enough, often is an excess amount of anandamide, which is one of the endocannabinoids that you mentioned, in the uterus, in the lining of these various women's uteri, which would make you think that it typically means there's something wrong with the receptor system. And what sounds counterintuitive, but that microdosing with cannabis would help to relieve these issues. Of course, there's been no good clinical studies on this. Why? Because of course we haven't been able to study cannabis because it's still considered federally illegal, even though right now today, after the last election, we have 35 states plus DC with medical marijuana laws. I never thought that would happen in my lifetime.
It's incredible, and it shows that people have really recognized that the importance of the system, because it's not necessarily a cure-all, but by balancing the system and doing what we can to balance the system properly, using high-quality medicine or cannabis products or hemp products, it makes a huge difference in our overall health. Mm-hmm. And that, you know, poor behavior that feeds the bad bacteria, like eating the bacteria we don't want as much of, or the microbiome we don't want as much of, like eating too much added sugar, eating too much artificial ingredients and things of that nature, and a non-balanced diet that has a high toxic load actually causes imbalances to our endocannabinoid system. Similarly, having a high chronic stress over time causes imbalances to the endocannabinoid system. So the activities like what you're saying, altering nutrition in a healthy way, supplementing with some high quality CBD products, for instance, getting like 30 minutes of movement a day, you know, or, you know, as close to that as you can, and really optimizing our day-to-day in all these different areas helps to optimize the functioning of our endocannabinoid system and therefore our gut microbiome at the same time.
Ditto.
Awesome.
For
I just want to
sure.
make sure I was getting this right because I'm learning a lot here.
Absolutely. And, you know, to me, when I think cannabis, to me, it's plant medicine. And, you know, and I see food as medicine. But food can also,
Hippocrates, right?
yes, but you know, food can also be poison too. That, you know,
right.
People, there's a second half of that quote. So we really have to pay a lot of attention to that. And I think, you know, when we're talking about behaviors, behavior change is not something that's easy. It's really something that people often need somebody to help them through. And when I say somebody, I don't mean necessarily, although it's good to have guidance from somebody like me or Dave, but it's also good to have a community. This is why, even when, you know, think about it, if you want to get out now and take a walk, you need get an accountability partner. Find somebody who will take a walk with you. So if you're going to try to start intermittent fasting, so we have done this in our household. I'm not going to do it alone. So, you know, whoever lives, you know, my family has no choice but to go along with me, you know, on these things. And they're usually good about it because, you know, they've had, you know, good effects. In fact, if I could tell one little story, Dave, about my husband is an athlete.
Please.
He was a semi-professional soccer player. And, you know, when you are an elite athlete at that level, I think that you can still play with the age group that you started out at. So he was playing with guys who were ridiculously younger than he was, but skill-wise, he was probably better, but he couldn't run like these guys ran. So he had some very serious sport injuries. His abductor snapped. Now that's very painful because, you know, that keeps your leg and your bones together.
Exquisitely painful.
Oh, but he kept playing. And then he also had a sports hernia. So he had to go for this surgery. And it was a 5-hour surgery with 2 surgeons. And, you know, of course, we knew that this was going to be a long for recovery. But I had him on, you know, glutathione, NAC, curcumin products, hemp-derived CBD. You know, he was really loaded up with a lot of different things. When he went back in for his post-op checkup, however many weeks that was, and my husband he's not a spring chicken. He couldn't. The doctor was in shock. He said, "I've never seen anything like this, especially in your age group." So when, you know, my husband told him what I recommended, he was like, "That's great." But what was really sort of sad to me is he didn't say, you know, "Can I refer people to you?" or "What did you do? Can you help me learn?" He was happy, but he was really just staying in his lane. And that's something I don't understand that, but I see it a lot.
Yeah,
I see that a lot.
Very common. Yeah, absolutely.
You'd have to break down the psychology behind that because I want to know what it is.
Well, the psychology of what specifically?
Is it an ego thing of why you can't be open to other ways of healing?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, it's absolutely an ego thing. I mean, I think the other thing is that when we are already stressed out, right, when we're already overwhelmed with whatever it is that's going on in our lives, it's different for everyone. Our natural go-to is to oppose change, because change itself is scary.
Oh yeah, paradigm shifts are impossible for people.
Right. And so if you've been taught that something is the way to do it your whole life, and from your perspective, it's working, even though it may not actually be working, but from your perspective, it's working. And that has become familiar to you and kind of inculcated this sense of stability. That stability becomes very comfortable. And as soon as you try to tell someone, especially telling someone, there's something funny about, and I come across this all the time, because doctors telling people things only has like, I think a 50% at best adherence rate. People come and pay us hundreds of dollars to tell them what to do because of our expertise. And the same with you, Laura.
And people don't do it.
They only take our advice 50% of the time at best, right? And so a big change to that paradigm with doctors that we have been taking, which I think has really made a big difference, is how do we figure out, instead of telling people what to do, which we call top-down learning, how do we figure out how to help people understand and figure out what to do on their own more effectively, right? Provide them with the resources, empower them with technology like Apollo, like wearable trackers, like Oura Ring, to understand their data, and to really get connected with their body, and to give them the resources for self-discovery so that they feel that they are the ones making the decision, which ultimately they are. And if they are not making the decision, nothing's going to change.
That was a seminal scene in my big fat Greek wedding, when do you remember, if anybody watched that movie, it was fantastic. When they have Tula's father believe that it was his idea for her to leave the restaurant and work at the travel agency, so she could still do it, but they had to make him think that it was his idea. Yes, I agree. People have to find things on their own, and that's often how paradigm shifts happen. You know, I have been working for a very long time with people on the autism spectrum as a result. Now, this is as a result of my own experience with my daughter. I never had any intention to work in that field, but obviously my daughter, I believe, chose me to say, you're going to come on this path with me. And you know, anybody who have kids knows you better follow the path, because if you don't follow the path, you're going to be very unhappy. And that is ultimately how I got there. But I had a very, very open mind to say, I'm going to try pretty much anything. I mean, just to be dramatic about it, if somebody had showed me some data, or somebody said to me, these 10 families did so well because the mother cut off her arm and sewed it to the top of her head, I would have said, okay, yeah, let's go. You know, it was, but that's how much I had my mind open, was to look at so many different healing modalities to help her. And as I said earlier, some of them had immediate response. I mean, I am talking right there and then. And one of those, and I'll tell you what it was, it's a listening program. It's called therapeutic listening. And I don't even understand it, but it's a different way to modulate music. So they take typically classical music, you're listening to it with these special headphones. She was very young at the time and not coming downstairs reciprocally. So she was putting, you know what that means. When you come downstairs, you have 1 foot on each tread. She was putting two feet on each tread. She wore the headphones, immediately switched to 1 foot on each tread, took off the headphones, and it lasted for the rest of her life. That was the most dramatic. She also did, you know, vision therapy, which is very popular among children with special needs. And unfortunately, all that did was gave me a much smaller bank account. So, and I'm not saying that those two things are always going to work or not work. That's what worked and didn't work for her. But I was always willing to try, and still am. I mean, I'm always still looking, you know, at new things for her.
Yeah, absolutely. And I admire you for the hard work that you've done, and the results that you've been getting, you know, are really incredible. And I really appreciate you taking the time to join us. I know we're brushing up on time here, and I want to be respectful of your time. We've had some incredible questions, so many questions coming through. We really appreciate everyone engaging with us and joining in. We've had over 300 participants today, which is really wonderful, and you guys are really great. We have currently a sale going on for Apollo, for our Apollo birthday right now. It's our 1-year birthday. So please check out the website if you're interested. And we are also very happy for those of you who are interested in learning more about this. Please reach out to Laura. Check out her book, The CBD Oil Miracle. It's an amazing book. Oh, I just found out our sale, our Apollo sale isn't live yet, but I think it will be soon. And we'll make sure to let everybody know when that, if you're on our, the best thing to do is sign up for the Apollo email list on our website, and you'll get an email as soon as the sale is live.
And I'm also going to put something in the chat. For those of you who are practitioners and want to learn more about cannabis and how to integrate it, you can also go to you could find this on my lauralagano.com, but also at holisticcanna.com. And I'm going to do a promo code so you get a discount, but I have to talk to my, wait until Friday for that to be live, for a discount code for the program. If anybody is out there and wants to learn more about cannabis and integrating it.
Thank you so much for that. And Laura, are you accepting new clients? We've been getting some folks asking about that.
I am, yes.
I am as well. And my website is drdave.io. So if anyone's interested, please feel free to reach out via my website, drdave.io. I'll drop in the chat. Could you drop where people can reach out to you, Laura, if they're interested?
I already put in the Holistic Canna site, and now I'll put in. Is
that the best place for you to reach out to you as a client?
You can get me there, but you can also get me. Oh, look, I put Laura. That's not it. Ignore that. Ignore that.
I was like, that's a great URL.
Maybe I'll have to buy that one too. My husband will in the middle of the night wake up and say, I have a great name for a website. And how many websites do we need?
Yeah. And yeah, a lot apparently. So with that, we really appreciate all of you. Please feel free to reach out to us.
Wait, am I not giving, somebody said that they're not seeing my chat, but I think,
Oh, do you see it says panelists and attendees, or does it just say panelists on your?
Well, I think mine is only saying panelists.
If you click the little button, I'll fix it here.
All right, let me redo this.
Panelists and attendees.
Oh, okay. So there we go. Let me put this back in then. Thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah, no problem. And please feel free to reach out to us. You can reach us at Apollo through apolloneuro.com, APOLLONEURO.com. You can sign up for our newsletter. We have an exciting lineup of webinar guests for everyone over the next year that is really top notch from all different fields of medicine, health, and well-being with world leaders in the space. And you can also reach out to us on our socials. We're always happy to hear from you at Apollo Neuro on Instagram. We're also on Twitter. And you can reach out to me at Dave Rabin on Twitter or at Dr. David Rabin on Instagram. And Laura, I'll give you the last word if there's anything that you would like to leave everyone with today.
I'm going to leave you with nutrition is the basis of cell biology. You really have to think about what you eat, and you can change, as Dr. Dave pointed out, your genetic expression or repression. So there are things you want to express and things you want to repress in terms of your genetics. And you have the power to do that by the lifestyle choices you make. You have that power. And I think that power was taken away from us. I don't know, probably sometime in the 40s, when we turned everything over. But people used to heal themselves all the time. This isn't new. So we really have to take that back, and you have to have that confidence that you really can heal yourself.
What incredible last words. I couldn't agree more. That's what this is all about. That's what nutrition is about. That's what Apollo is about. And it's really about learning or remembering that we all are born with the ability to heal ourselves, and we just need to learn how to do it and nurture that part of ourselves, nurture with nutrition, nurture with movement, nurture with love, with gratitude, forgiveness and compassion, and all the tools that we have available to us to nurture that self-healer will literally be what is the best thing for us to feel better on a day-to-day, moment-to-moment basis, and in the long run. So thank you so much for that, Laura. I'm so grateful for you for joining us, and
You're
I
welcome.
look forward to chatting again soon.
I hope I see you in person this year.
I know. Tell me about it, right? We will look forward to that.
Yes.
All right. Thank you again.
Okay.
Take care, everyone.
Ciao.
Bye.